Welcome to the Seahawkers podcast with your hosts, Adam Emmert.
Dude, I ran 5'8" in knee-deep snow.
And Brandan Schultz.
Well, considering what Matt Damon did there in The Martian, it's got to be contaminated.
Go Hawks!
This is episode 194 of the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandan Schultz of the Military Seahawkers. And joining me, my good buddy, Montana Seahawker Adam Emmert.
I'm not the only one joining you today. We've got somebody who actually knows stuff to talk about things.
That's right.
And I'm very excited about that.
Rob Staton on the show with us, kicking it off. How you doing, Rob?
I'm great, guys. Yeah, really enjoying the combine at the moment. Excited about free agency starting next week and just intrigued to see where the Seahawks are going to go this offseason.
It's been a busy weekend, and it all kicked off really on Thursday. It maybe even sooner for you with some of the weigh-ins and that sort of thing. But Pete Carroll's press conference kind of kicking things off on Thursday. Want to get into that. Want to talk about some of the things John Schneider said. And of course, Rob, getting into some of the things that you've seen over this weekend. And we still have defensive backs to go on Monday, but I figured since we have the measurements of arm lengths, which seem to be critically important for the Seahawks, I'm sure you've narrowed it down on some of the guys to watch there as well.
Yeah, that's the thing about this, about the combine week, and I know we're going to come on to it in a minute, but you do find out so many details and just little things like we know what they want in a cornerback, so we can go and see, that we can eliminate a whole host of names and concentrate on a certain amount. We know what they like in the running back position. We know what they like from other positions as well. So that's what makes this great. It feels like we can really focus on a smaller group of players after the combine.
Well, let's kick things off by starting to talk about the two press conferences that we saw. And Pete Carroll kicking it off on Thursday. And really, I think what Seahawks fans were wanting to see, and I know, Adam, you were interested in this, is why the coaching changes. And we got some answers there.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the answer was it was time. So,
right.
It was a really interesting answer. I honestly didn't get a ton out of Pete Carroll's presser.
Really?
The same old Pete stuff, always compete, always trying to do better. Always got we're always looking under every rock and competing every day and being in every deal. And just time for a change. And he thinks Brian Schottenheimer is going to do a good job. That's all I got out of it.
Well, that was the one takeaway with it for me is Pete Carroll wanting Schottenheimer as a dedicated quarterback guy. And that he wanted to kind of connect the play caller with the quarterback. So that was kind of the key message.
Great. Fantastic. I just wish they would have picked maybe a good quarterback guy to do that.
Well, this is the same guy that coached up Drew Brees.
No. How did this guy coach up Drew Brees? Where do you get that?
Before he was in San Diego before Brees went to New Orleans.
Right. And was Drew Brees awesome then? Yes. Or was Drew Brees awesome when he went to New Orleans and paired up with Sean Payton?
Drew Brees has said positive things about Brian Schottenheimer. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, he doesn't want to throw the dude under the bus, but I'm not on board with this hire. I can't imagine you are either, Rob. You got to back me up on this. Brian Schottenheimer's terrible.
Hey, listen, I'm going to give him a chance, but he wasn't the name that I think a lot of fans were looking for. And John D. Filippo was a number of fans' first choice, and he's gone to be an offensive coordinator somewhere else. And you just want to see that creativity. You see a lot of teams working in a very different way these days, and the Seahawks have gone the opposite way. Rather than indulge in someone who maybe is completely into his analytics and a bit of a Sean McVay type who wants to spread it out and put certain players in the best position to succeed. Instead, we've gone for the ultimate Pete Carroll way of doing things, which is to try and bring somebody in who's going to run the ball 40 or 50 times if you ask him to do it. And that's what you're going to get with Pete Carroll. That's the way that he wants to play. And ultimately, I don't think whether it was Brian Schottenheimer or anybody else, they were going to come in and run the Pete Carroll offense. And that's what you're going to see next year.
Well, one of the questions from this press conference really got on my nerves. And I was listening to Around the NFL when Greg Rosenthal was the one who outed himself for asking this question. And he said to Coach Carroll, Earl Thomas has been, quote, pretty vocal about wanting a new deal. Now, Adam, I don't use the word hate very often. Mm-hmm. But I hate it when reporters read all the articles out there as if Earl's doing some big press tour when it was one comment at the Pro Bowl. And now there's been tons of reports based on that one comment at the Pro Bowl. And now all of a sudden, Earl is being pretty vocal about wanting a new deal.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. A star player wants more money going into the last year of his deal. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, Earl Thomas is obviously a bad guy for wanting that, because no other player ever wants more money going into their last year of their deal and have their contract redone. That never happens. This is an aberration.
Well, I think it just lends itself to the drama surrounding Earl Thomas ever since the Cowboys game. And that seems to be kind of the approach this offseason, that, Earl Thomas getting the deal. Michael Bennett, he reports were at the combine now that the Seahawks are trying to trade him. I know that websites love writing articles about Michael Bennett just so people can get riled up in the comments section. And that seems to be... I have this theory with regard to trades that we hear about and teams interested in making trades happen. If we hear about them as fans, if we're hearing about them, the time has already passed that you're going to get the kind of deal that gives the type of value for that type of player. And when I think of Michael Bennett and the production that he gives on the field, the number of the years he has left on his contract, his age, I feel like a third or fourth round pick is probably about the right value for Michael Bennett. And now that we're hearing these stories, I don't think that the Seahawks are going to get that kind of value if they really want to get rid of him, like the Chiefs wanted to get rid of Marcus Peters. Then that price probably going to go down 5th, 6th round pick. But I don't know if they would, based on the pass rushers that are there in free agency, I don't think he's going to get dealt.
Yeah, Rob, I don't know. What do you think on this? Because I honestly don't think that trading Michael Bennett for, say, a 4th, 5th round, 6th round pick is even close to worth it.
Well, in terms of what you're going to get in return, it's not going to be, and you're not going to be able to replace him that easily either. It's really what the motives are for Pete Carroll moving forward. I've seen it suggested. I've talked to some people, and this suggestion has been made, and I think it holds some water, that maybe what we're seeing now is Pete Carroll's time in New England. He went there. It was a very veteran locker room, and the message didn't resonate with some of those veteran players. He went to USC, younger players, and managed to turn them into one of the powerhouse teams in college. Comes to the Seahawks, builds a young team, a young, hungry team, and they have a great load of success, but they're now a veteran, aging team. And maybe that message that Pete Carroll, that was so good in the early Seahawks years and in the time at USC, maybe it has gone a little bit stale right now for some of these veteran players. And maybe Pete Carroll feels like, I need the younger guys again. Younger guys work better with my style of coaching. And if he feels like the likes of Michael Bennett and Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman just aren't responding to it anymore, he probably feels if he's going to be the Seahawks coach, he has to get a younger defense. And there's another thing that has to be remembered here. The defensive spend for the Seahawks, nobody spent more on their defense last year than the Seahawks. They spent nearly $100 million on their defense last year. It was something like 56% of the overall cap was spent on the defense, compared to about 30% for the offense. And I think that they probably want to balance that out more. And it's great when you've got the stars in their prime, Earl and Cam and Bennett and Cliff and Bobby and KJ, and they're all getting paid. But now that they maybe feel like they're going to have to churn this thing a little bit, and it's maybe going to become more of the Russell Wilson show than it has been in the past, they might feel like they've got to balance the cap spending out now. You're not going to make much of a saving on Bennett this year, but you will if he's off the books in 2019, if you get rid of him now. So there's lots of big decisions that are going around here, but they're not going to get value for Michael Bennett. They're not going to get a 3rd or 4th round pick. They'll probably be lucky to get a later round pick for him, given his contract and his age. And it's not a very, very ideal situation for the Seahawks trying to move Michael Bennett now.
Yeah, I'm completely out on the Seahawks trading Michael Bennett at this point. There's just no way you get a return, just as you went down and eloquently put here, Rob. You went down all the reasons why they're not going to get that value. And on top of that, I don't know how much of a market there is for him. How many teams there's a market for him, in the sense that there's a lot of owners that really are offended by him sitting down during the national anthem. And I mean, you saw Kaepernick struggle to get a job. And I think, Michael Bennett, you'd have a hard time finding a trading partner. Like, for example, the Dallas Cowboys, would they take a look at him? I don't think so. I mean, there's a bunch of teams where I don't think that plays well. So I just don't think there's really a market for it. I don't think that the return is worth it. I'd rather just keep him on the books and roll with it. Also, I think the idea of trading Earl Thomas is freaking stupid. That is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. He's your best player on defense. He's the leader of that defense. He is not even close to being on the downside of his career. Like everybody acts like, he's 34. He's like 30. It just doesn't make any sense for me to trade him either. Let's just keep these guys, keep them happy. It's going to be okay. Maybe draft an offensive lineman or two, because that seems to be where the problem is. I think we could all agree. And then maybe win another Super Bowl. Let's just do that.
Well, I want to go back to something you said about Michael Bennett, because you bring up an interesting point just about the market for him. And it kind of makes me wonder if, in terms of strategy, you could use Michael Bennett as a player and trying to shop him to other teams to try and find out what the market's going to be in free agency for some of these other players. I think about, Marcus Peters was a guy who sat or knelt during the anthem. Eric Reed is a guy who's going to be a free agent who knelt during the anthem. He was one of the main guys with Kaepernick. So by gauging the market with Bennett, you can really find out if there's some kind of, obviously, what the players do during the games is going to have an effect on their market value with some of these teams. So where can you take advantage of it as a general manager if you can say that you're okay with that?
Yeah, because their value's a little depressed.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I can see what you're saying there. I found the John Schneider press conference to be far more informational to me.
The one thing that came out of it, and really you hit on it in terms of some of the players and playing the younger players, Rob, is that this was something that John Schneider pointed out. And, one of the names, two of the names that came out of his mouth were Delano Hill, Tedrick Thompson, are guys, young guys that could be ready to jump in there and fill in for veterans. But pointing out that they did so well in the draft in the past that a lot of these guys were able to start right away. And they had that mentality of, they had a different mentality than some of the players that they're drafting now.
Yeah, I think one of the comments was along the lines of the problem that they've had, though, is that players have been coming in and they've been saying, wow, I get to play with Cam Chancellor, instead of thinking, wow, I get to compete with Cam Chancellor. And maybe that has been an issue for them, that these younger guys come in and rather than expecting to play, why would you? If you were Delano Hill, he's not going to expect to play ahead of Earl Thomas or Cam Chancellor. They're kind of just grateful for that, to have the chance to share the same meeting room with them. And maybe that is something that they're thinking about now, that they actually want to get. At the core of everything for Pete Carroll is competition, and they've not had that for a long, long time. It's very hard you're paying lip service to competition when you're saying we want people to challenge Russell Wilson and Earl Thomas and Richard. It's just not going to happen. Even the people they draft are not going to believe that message, because they know that Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Russell Wilson are going to end up starting. So maybe he feels like he needs a bit of that back. Like I said, maybe he feels like he needs a younger team moving forward and to get that competition back as well. But I understand that point of view, but I also agree that the sentiment that, are they considering trading some of these guys to make up for mistakes? Are the Seahawks as a team right now constantly trying to make up for errors? So are they looking at contracts that they maybe shouldn't have given out with hindsight to Bennett and Chancellor, regretting that and trying to find ways to get around that now? Are they thinking we went all in on 2017 and traded away second and third round picks for Brown and Sheldon Richardson to try and win a Super Bowl last year? And now, because we haven't got those second and third round picks, we're going to sacrifice one of our best players in Earl Thomas to try and get some of those picks back, because we still need to do a lot of things this year. Are they constantly compensating and trying to make up for maybe mistakes that they've made? And are they going to keep making those mistakes if they follow that plan? Or have they got to just sort of draw a line on something and go, where are we as a team? What are we? Do we still feel like we've got a core that is good enough to contend? Do we need to make some severe changes? Do we need to get younger? And they need to sort of, I'm sure they will have done over the last few weeks, draw up the plan, which is going to be the next 2, 3, 4 years. And that's where they need to move forward, and they need to stop making maybe knee-jerk moves such as trades in training camp and trades in the middle of the season and sacrificing the future of the franchise to try and just get over the line, when clearly last season they weren't just a left tackle away from winning the Super Bowl. The running game was a mess. They got loads of injuries, and yet they still go and make that move. And I think there needs to be sort of a longer term view, at least over the next 2, 3 years. But that doesn't mean they have to blow up the team, but they may feel like they have to make some very difficult decisions now.
So that kind of brings up the age-old debate. Are the Seahawks reloading, or are they in rebuild mode? Like, what do you think their future holds? Because if it were me, I would say we're in reload mode. Like, I do think this core can compete. The rash of injuries that they had last year, that is not common. We have that many star players go down in a season. That's not going to happen year in and year out. I think they did have a hell of a team going into the 2017 training camp. And I think the trade for Dwayne Brown was a little more long-term because that's a guy that they've already talked about. They want him to finish his career as a Seahawk. But Sheldon Richardson, that was definitely a short-term trade. Like they traded for him that year to try to contend. So do you think they need to rebuild or reload?
I think it's a really difficult question to ask because we could be sat here in a year's time and fully have gone through another season like last season and having kept everything together and just trying to repair the running game and the offensive line. And we could have said, wow, why didn't they feel like they had to make some changes because this team's clearly not good enough anymore? Or they could bring in an offensive lineman, bring in a running back this offseason, keep the core together, draft some young talent on the third day of the draft, have another go next year, win 10 or 11 games, and everyone thinks, well, what was the panic for? Was it clearly injuries and the lack of the running game that was the issue last year? So you can make a case for pretty much anything. You could make a case for there needed to be severe changes to this team. You could make a case for just a few tweaks here and there and focusing on some of the major issues that they had last year. And I think it could go either way. I know you see reports about Earl Thomas moving. They're not going to trade Earl Thomas for a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick or whatever Marcus Peters went. They'll only trade Earl Thomas as the value is there. And if the message they've got during the combine this week is, we'll give you a 2nd rounder or we'll give you a 3rd rounder. If the Seahawks don't like that, they're going to keep Earl Thomas. They're not just going to give him away. And it'll be the same for people like Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett and others as well. So I still think there's a pretty good chance that Earl will stay and Richard Sherman will stay. And I'm completely comfortable with that. I don't see it. There's no desire on my part, and I'm sure you guys will agree, to move on from some of these really good players just for the sake of getting extra picks, getting younger and stuff like that. Rebuilding a team isn't the easiest thing to do. And it's a lot easier just to make a few tweaks and turn things around very quickly. For example, the Philadelphia Eagles and what they've done since Howie Roseman came back, than to rebuild a whole team. So I don't want to see a whole rebuild, but I do think they need to really focus on the running game if they are going to keep some of these guys. They've got to support Russell Wilson there. They've got to support the defense. They've got to be able to run the ball again. And because of that, one way or another, they're going to have to get at least one more pick in the first 3 rounds of this draft. And I think the way they're going to do that is by trading down, not necessarily by trading everybody, even though that seems to be a possibility.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do it, and trading players is one. And with it probably not happening, they're going to have to use their 1st round pick to do like they have done in previous years and trade back that way. And one of the things that we found out from John Schneider's press conference, because there was a little bit of a question about how many draft picks the Seahawks might have, we found out they have a 1st, a 4th, and those ones we knew. They have 3 5ths, and then they also have 3 7ths. And the other 7th round pick was Isaiah Battle from the Chiefs. That was a conditional 7th round pick. And so they get to keep that pick. So Seahawks go into the draft with 8 picks. Rob, one of the things that you did going into the combine this weekend, which was incredible. And if you're a Seahawks fan, I hope you found this resource that Rob put together of some of the things to watch, some of the players to watch at all the different positions and different drills that the Seahawks find important. And I want to start off by talking about running game, Rob, because that's clearly, offensive line, running game. I think those go hand in hand for places that the Seahawks want to improve this offseason. And running back, just one of those skill positions that I think people find intriguing. And you had 3 names to watch. You had Nick Chubb, Ronald Jones II from USC, Chubb's from Georgia, and then Kerryon Johnson from Auburn. And I'm supposed to tell you, Rob, that Cameron Cole, who listens to this show, thinks Nick Chubb is overrated. And I'm sure everyone hyping his combine results, his 38.5-inch vertical, his 10'8" broad jump, his 4.5 240 time. It seems to match the explosive characteristics the Seahawks are looking for. And, for a back, that's pretty impressive considering he tore, multiple CLs with a knee injury in college. What did you think about Chubb?
Well, in terms of what you've just said there about him being almost a prototype for what the Seahawks have looked for, he absolutely is. Whether or not he's overrated or not, I don't know, because when he came to Georgia, and if people remember a few years ago, Todd Gurley got injured and Nick Chubb was a freshman at the time and got the opportunity to come in as the starter and was just outstanding. Looked like a top 10, top 15 pick in the future. If he hadn't had the injury, we'd probably be talking about him in the same way. Maybe not quite as much as Saquon Barkley, but he'd be in very early first round type option. And there's absolutely no doubting that the very, very serious career threatening injury that he had knocked him back a step. Now, he tried very, very hard to get back for the 2016 season, maybe tried a little bit too hard. He was so desperate to play in that season. I think he rushed back. He never looked anywhere near 100% in 2016. I think giving himself another year and then coming back to Georgia was the right thing to do. He looked a lot more explosive, a lot more powerful, and a lot more like the old Nick Chubb. And I think we're going to see him get even better as time goes on. I don't think we saw the finished article in 2017. I think as he gets into a pro training program, can concentrate on football full time, can really build his strength and get back to the extreme level of athleticism that he had before the injury, then you're going to see a very, very special player. People like Frank Gore suffered very serious injuries in college, and look at the careers that they had. And I think when you look at Nick Chubb, you see a Jonathan Stewart type, you see a Frank Gore type, someone who can carry the ball up the middle, can take the wind out of the sails of a defense, can help win you the game in the fourth quarter. I think he's that type of player. He's very, very serious. And look, he's not going to bounce outside. He's not got that really dynamic speed to get to the edge, bounce outside, break off the huge runs. He's very much a north-south runner. You're probably going to want to combine him with somebody else who can do some of the third down stuff. But if you want someone who can be like Mark Ingram was for the New Orleans Saints this last couple of years, then that is kind of what Nick Chubb can do for you. And I do think that the Seahawks need that bit of dependable, consistent physicality up the middle, and someone that a defense has to account for and has to think about when they're preparing to face the Seahawks.
And where do you project Nick Chubb to go in the draft?
It's very difficult to say, because I said before the draft, before the combine, that if he performed as well as he did at the Spark Combine in 2013, then he could really promote his stock high up again. And he kind of has tested exactly the way that he did in 2013. So I think that he's probably going to go in round 2. I have to see what the medical checks say. We've not really heard anything about that. I think Nick talked about it in his interview, in his press conference, saying that basically teams are fine, that it's recovered and healed well enough. But he's going to be, I think, in the second round, possibly third round, but no later than that.
Now, Ronald Jones was another guy that you were kind of interested in, and he had a 36.5-inch vertical. He didn't do the broad jump. He had a 4.65 40 time. Does that concern you at all? Does that put him kind of outside what the Seahawks might look for?
Well, when he was running his 40 at the combine, he actually pulled his hamstring mid-run and jogged across the line. And I think it's a little bit unfair that the NFL has put his 40 time on the website and have said that he actually ran I think it was a 4.65 that they gave him in the end, but he didn't finish the run. Essentially, they should have whistled that dead, and they should have never counted that time, because he was very clearly injured during the run. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I mean, apart from the fact that he got injured, and we've seen enough injuries for the Seahawks in recent years to sort of think, be careful with that one. But he was one of a number of, I've actually been writing about this today. There's been about 4 or 5 really big name players who pulled their hamstrings while running the 40-yard dash. And I think the NFL needs to look into this. Ronald Jones did it. Vita Vea did it today. He pulled his hamstring in the 40 and didn't do any of the drills. Roquan Smith, the Georgia linebacker, hurt himself with a hamstring injury running his 40, didn't do any of the drills. That's 3 big name players. And I think there was about 5 or 6 others that pulled hamstrings running the 40-yard dash. And I think the NFL needs to look into why this happened. Are they asking too much of these players this week? Are they a little bit... Is there too much pressure on them maybe during these 40-yard dashes? I don't know, but they have to look into this, because we don't want to see players getting injured at the combine. I think that Ronald Jones is going to be an absolute star. He's got like an it factor, which is just incredible. You mentioned there the 36.5-inch vertical, so he's definitely got some explosive talent. I think he said he's going to be about 210 pounds at the USC Pro Day, which is right in the ballpark for the Seahawks. I think he's going to be a very, very special player.
Well, a couple other guys I know that Seahawks fans have talked about. One of them, Rashad Penny, and you have him down as a borderline fit for the Seahawks, 220 pounds, 32.5-inch vertical. So maybe the vertical a little bit of the running backs that you talked about on the website. He was the lowest of 7 or 8 that you listed, but 10-foot broad jump, though. So a pretty explosive player and kind of an exciting player that I think some people are excited about.
Yeah, a good player, really good prospect. I could definitely see him coming in either as a second or a third round pick to a lot of teams and having the same kind of impact as the Kansas City Chiefs rookie did in Hunt last year. I could definitely see him coming in and having that kind of an impact. He's a very interesting player. I think if anyone wants to watch and learn a little bit about him, go and watch the Stanford game from last season when he was running for San Diego State. That's a really tough defensive line. Everybody knows what Stanford's all about. And he ran very, very well. He's a kick returner. I think he needs to work on his pass catching. Surprisingly, didn't do quite enough of that. And at the Senior Bowl didn't show quite as well there as he could have done. And he had a bit of a weird week at the Senior Bowl because he didn't really stand out during the practices or anything. And then when the game started, he looked really good. So, yeah, he's going to be an option for the Seahawks. I just wonder whether or not they will look at others first. And I think they're going to look at people like Nick Chubb and Kerryon Johnson, who is fantastic and he's underrated and people need to talk about him more. And, some of the others that we've been talking, Ronald Jones, for example. I know a lot of people like Darius Geis. I think that maybe the Seahawks are going to have other players ahead of Rashad Penny, but he has to be on the list of considerations. And he is a fun player, and he's just a really good player in a really good running back class.
And those are all guys if you're talking first, second, or third round. But if you go a little bit farther back to, say, the fifth round where they have 3 picks, then are you looking at guys maybe like John Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. John Kelly's not the kind of guy that you want to put the ball in his hands and say, lead the offense. He's not going to be a 20, 30 carry a game guy, 16 games a season. That's just not what he is. But if you can get him 10 touches in a game, incredible intensity, tenacious. He's got that kind of Seahawks physicality and running style that you expect, just doesn't go down on first contact, loves to pull out a stiff arm, will get extra yardage, will fall forward. He's really good in the passing game, really good in the screen game, willing to pass protect and stick his helmet in there and block and try and protect the quarterback. So I think as a potential third down back who could do a little bit more, he's the kind of guy that you bring in as a third down back and pair him with somebody else. But then if the main guy got injured and you needed John Kelly to lead the rushing attack for a couple of weeks, he could absolutely do that. One of the best things about him was that he was listed, I think, about 205 pounds at Tennessee, and he came to the combine at 216 pounds and ran well and performed well and tested well and didn't look like the extra weight was hindering him at all. He is a really interesting player, and I think someone that Seahawks fans need to make themselves familiar with.
Well, let's move over to offensive line, Rob, because there were some interesting storylines along the offensive line. Billy Price was one guy who another injured player tore his pec or sprained his pec. Was it a partial tear?
Yeah.
Partial tear of his pec.
Pec problems. He had pec problems. Okay.
And then you had Isaiah Wynn, who didn't perform, but I know he's a guy that we talked about last time. He didn't drill. He had a sprain CL that he had surgery on at the end of the year. And then maybe the biggest story, Orlando Brown, everyone talking about how terrible he did at the combine, the Oklahoma Sooners left tackle.
Well, and one other thing that I really want to hear Rob say. Yeah. That there is a guard that we could draft that plays guard that could then play guard for us.
Yeah. I think there's one of those guys that
Yeah, there's a few of them. Oh yeah, there's you'll be pleased to know this is a good draft for the interior offensive linemen, and a few of them even played guard in college. So,
holy catfish! Well, that would be amazing.
Yeah. well, we'll start with the first bit about Billy Price. Yeah, that was disappointing that he's got a partially torn pec. It doesn't seem to be too troubling. I think he's probably going to get a minor surgery of some kind, and then I don't think we're going to see him at the Ohio State Pro Day, which is a bit of a shame. But he's going to be a really good pro. Probably play center at the next level, but some teams might consider him at guard, but I think his best position is going to be center. Isaiah Wynn, I think he got the labrum injury, so he's had some surgery on that. For me, Isaiah Wynn is like Zach Martin at Notre Dame and now at Dallas. I just think that when you watch Martin, even though he's playing left tackle in college, everything about him was just classy. He just very rarely got beat, always seemed to be in the right place. Right level of physicality and edge that you want to see in an offensive lineman, just incredibly composed, great footwork, just looked like he was born to play offensive line. There's a bit of a difference between Wynn and Martin in that when Zach Martin went to Notre Dame, they kind of felt straight away as soon as they recruited him that this was a future first round pick. They kind of had him penned to be that straight away. And I think Isaiah Wynn's maybe had to work at his craft a little bit more and get to where he is. But technically, he is absolutely fantastic. And, you don't make a comparison to people like Zach Martin on a whim. I mean, that he's just just, for me, that's the kind of level you're talking about there. And at the Senior Bowl, he was fantastic. He's an amazing player. And if anybody takes him in the 20s in the first round, they are going to get a superb player for me. And I think a left guard that is going to go to Pro Bowls, that is going to have a fantastic career. So I think Wynn's a real name to keep an eye on there. But he is a left tackle moving over to guard. So if you want to talk about some of the pure guards, then possibly one of the most impressive players you've seen at the Combine. Certainly, I would say that the most outstanding performer on Friday during the O-line and running back drills was Will Hernandez, the UTEP guard, who was just fantastic, had an explosive workout, ran quicker than people expected. He'd lost 20 pounds since the Senior Bowl and just looked amazing for it. In the mobility and the agility drills, it was just incredible watching him move around, because when you watch him on tape when he was 340 pounds, he was a little bit stiff and rigid and was more of a straight line block. You didn't want to get him on the move too often. He wasn't going to pull out to the left-hand side and hammer a linebacker. And yet when you saw him at the Combine, he was doing the kick slide drill better than some of the left tackles. He was just incredibly fluid and smooth. They do these little agility drills where they have the lineman lie on the floor, get up, run to a coach, then change direction and sprint and finish. Hernandez looked as good as anybody doing that. Just basically got tree trunks for legs, just incredible upper body power. Did very well in the bench press. That's more of a stamina test than a power test, but I think he got 40 reps or something like that, 37 reps in the end, and just loves the game and is just the ideal type of player that you bring in, you plug him in, he's going to have an impact as an interior lineman. With the way that he's performed this weekend, he's put himself into the late first round. And you're talking about three players right off the bat there, Hernandez and Wynn and Price, that would be excellent picks for the Seahawks in the first round. And then as you move a little bit later on, you've got people like Austin Corbett from Nevada, who could be an option for the Seahawks, maybe round 2, round 3 kind of range. You've got Braden Smith, who was the most explosive offensive line tester at the Combine, who had a really good workout there, who's maybe more of a second, third round type. You've got Wyatt Teller, who had a bit of a disappointing season for Virginia Tech last year, was really good in 2016, very explosive tester as well. A lot of potential there. So there are lots of options. For me, I think the Seahawks have to focus on left guard spot and the running back positions first and foremost in this draft. We may come on to the defensive prospects in a minute, but what we saw from the defensive linemen and linebackers just proved that the options are going to be better late in the draft at linebacker and on defense, and the options in the early rounds are going to be better on interior offensive line and running back, and that has to be the focus for me and where the Seahawks go.
One of the things that was interesting about watching the offensive line prospects was seeing our new offensive line coach, Mike Solari, kind of coaching the guys up down on the field.
It was, and it was really interesting watching how hands-on he was, because having watched every drill that's taken place since Friday, there's not been a coach that's really taken the floor and bossed everybody around the way that Solari did. Solari didn't just do one drill and then take a back seat and let somebody else take over, which is what's happened in every other positional drill since. You have sort of 4 or 5 different coaches who all do their own personal drill. Jim Tomsula, for example, the Washington coach who used to be with San Francisco, does one of the drills on the defensive line. He did his drill and then politely got the hell out of the way for everybody else to have their turn. Mike Solari was in on every single drill for the O-line. If there was another coach came in and was getting involved and setting things up, Solari had come in there and offer some coaching or some guidance. He'd put his arm around a prospect and say, you need to do this. If a guy didn't do it right, Solari would be the one who come over and give them a few tips and some coaching. He was bossing the field. He was taking control of the situation. He was coaching those guys up. My memory of Mike Solari with the Seahawks is pretty limited. I did write a piece about him when he was with Seattle, but was he like 10 years ago now? So watching him out on the field there and watching the way that he was coaching these young players, it was pretty reassuring to know that the Seahawks have actually landed a really good offensive line coach. I like the way that he conducted himself during these drills, and I thought that was one of the big positives of Friday.
Well, before we move on to defensive line, there's one other guy I want to ask about on the offensive line, Orlando Brown. I mentioned that it's been talked about how terrible he did. How far now he ran like a 5.8 for an offensive lineman, and just I think Daniel Jeremiah talked about how bad that is, and that typically,
dude, I ran 5.8 in knee deep snow.
Yeah, well, that you're not trying to be drafted in the NFL. And what did he say? That the typically guys who run over 5.7 in terms of a 40-yard dash, they don't get drafted. And yet here's a guy that we were talking about going in the first round potentially.
It's concerning. It really, you can't ignore that he's had a really bad workout. And you would want to blame it on the size, for example, but you just have to look at someone like Virginia Tech's Tim Settle. So he's 329 pounds. He ran a 5.37. So not an amazing time, what you'd expect from a 329 pound defensive lineman. But he ran a 5.37 and Orlando Brown ran a 5.85. I mean, it was a truly terrible performance. It kind of looked like he'd not done any preparation whatsoever. Being the biggest guy at the combine, and he pretty much is at 6'8" and 345 pounds, will only get you so far in terms of bad testing. So it wasn't just that he ran badly. He had a pretty average bench press results of 14 reps. And given that he's 345 pounds, he really needs to be repping 225 pounds more than 14 times. I think if you ask most people to essentially bench half their body weight, they would probably get more than 14 reps out with very little practice. Yeah. He had a 19.5-inch vertical, which is pathetic. A 6'10" broad jump. I mean, we are talking about numbers here that the three of us could probably challenge, without much of an effort there. And when you're looking at a guy who has been touted as a potential a top 15 pick because it's not the greatest defensive tackle class this year. He has got some decent tape, but at Oklahoma, he's not a slouch. You do see some really good things on tape, but you just have to wonder, what's his attitude going to be like when he gets paid? If this is the performance he puts on at a huge job interview, and he just stinks the place out like he did at the combine here, so it is a concern. I don't think he's going to plummet down the boards into like the round 3 or round 4 range as a consequence of this, but he's probably gone from someone who could realistically go in the top 20 as the best of a pretty average bunch of tackles to someone who might drop out of the first round now.
All right, before we bounce to the defensive side of the ball, I have one player I want to ask you about, Rob. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this because this is my own harebrained theory here. Where do you see Lamar Jackson going as far in the draft, as far as what round? Because listening to John Schneider's press conference, somebody asked him about him right out of the gate, and John got that little smirk and that little twinkle in his eye that he gets when he's excited about somebody. I think he really likes Lamar Jackson. And the idea that I don't know where he's projected to go, but let's say he could pick him up like in the 3rd or something like that. I think he might do it.
Yeah, I think Lamar Jackson's going to go in the first round. I just think he's far too good. And given the need for quarterbacks, he's going to go in the first round. He's an incredible talent. You're talking about a person who can do all of the things running the football that Michael Vick did. There's countless examples in college where the play doesn't even break down as much as just a couple of quick reads. And if it's not there, take off. And he can take a quarterback draw 60 yards downfield. He can score touchdowns. On countless occasions, it was Lamar Jackson against the opponent, and Louisville provided him no support. It was like a one-man show. There was a game against North Carolina where he was about to take a sack, managed to wriggle away from the pressure, stepped up into the pocket and launched a throw about 60 yards downfield on an absolute dime to a player who was well covered downfield, but just put it in the perfect place for him to take it in for a deep touchdown. And it turned a sack into a 60, 70 yard touchdown as a consequence of that. He is a much better passer than people realize. Bobby Petrino hasn't put a lot of good quarterback. His quarterbacks don't seem to translate that well to the pros. It's just a surprise because they're generally well coached and well disciplined in college. But you can see these had a positive impact on Lamar Jackson. The progress he made from the 2016 season to the 2017 season, he throws with a lot more touch, a bit more accuracy as well. He is a very, very talented football player, and I think he's going to go probably in the top 20 picks. 25 at worst. The only thing I didn't like about it is that he seemed to be playing a game with the NFL over the weekend. So there was all these stories that he was asked to do receiver drills, and obviously he wasn't very happy about that, and quite rightly so as well. He is a quarterback, not a receiver. But his response to that was to not run a 40-yard dash, it seems, almost as to thumb his nose at the NFL and say, "Oh, I'm not going to run for you now because I want to prove that I'm a quarterback." So the only drills that he actually did at the combine, he didn't do any of the, I don't think he did any of the jumps, any of the runs. He didn't do anything. He just did the throwing. So it was almost look, I'm going to prove that I'm just a quarterback by throwing the ball and not by jumping and running. And I don't know. I don't know if that helped him that much. I think it would have helped his stock to go out there and run a 4.38, for example, which he's more than capable of doing, and having an explosive performance in the jumps. That for me would only confirm the comparisons to Michael Vick. I don't think that would have hurt him in any way.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we should be talking about Lamar Jackson, you mentioned the range that he could go in, because with Seattle having the number 18 pick, and this is why I think, Adam, that John Schneider had the glimmer in his eye. He knows because at the number 18 pick, if he doesn't go to a team like the Cardinals or Chargers at 15 or 17, then teams like maybe the Bills or the Steelers or the Saints, those could be a couple teams that could move up and allow us to move back later in round one.
That's a solid theory. I like that idea. I didn't know where he was projected to go at all.
Yeah.
Because I just heard some people saying, well, I think he's a receiver. And I was like, well, hell, is he going to fall to like second or third round? But okay, so he's a first rounder. That's cool. I actually kind of like the idea that he thumbed his nose at the NFL and was like, screw you guys. That's the attitude I want from my quarterback. Like, you don't believe in me? All right, well, you know, he just takes a stand.
Yeah.
You know, has some pride. I like it.
And he'll have a chance to do those types of things at his pro day, I'm sure. But let's stick on quarterback, Rob. Let's talk about that because, as Cameron Cole says, John Schneider has yet to draft a quarterback other than Russell Wilson in the entire time he's been here. But if that were to change, who, if any of these quarterbacks, do you see as a potentially intriguing day three prospect at quarterback?
I really don't see any of them, to be honest. I don't see an option there for the Seahawks this year. It's a very top-heavy quarterback class, so we're probably going to see 5 of them go in the first round. We're going to see Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson go in the first round. And then I think there's a considerable gap between those 5 and then people like Mason Rudolph, Kyle Lauletta are probably going to go in the same kind of range. Luke Falk. Some teams might like him more than others, and maybe he will go in the middle rounds. But then that might be it. You know, maybe someone like Mike White, for example, might sneak into a later round pick, or Riley Ferguson might go later on from Memphis. But it's hard to see anybody that the Seahawks feel is going to be a worthwhile pick. And given that they are probably going to have to add some young defensive players to this group, and they're going to have to fill a few different needs. I just, considering they've only ever spent 1 pick on a quarterback, as you mentioned there with Russell Wilson, it would seem a little bit weird that this would be the year that they would go ahead and do that. I just wonder whether or not when they'll look at undrafted free agents again. I don't think JT Barrett at Ohio State is going to get drafted. I just wonder, in the same way that they brought in Trevon Boykin, who had a good college career at TCU, I wonder whether they might have a look at JT Barrett as like an undrafted free agent, bring him into camp. Someone like that could be an option for them, but I don't think they're going to spend a draft pick on a quarterback this year.
Do you see Quentin Flowers from South Florida as a guy who probably go undrafted? Another short guy.
Yeah, I think he probably will. I've not studied him quite as much, but there is some athleticism there, and he's kind of one of those Seneca Wallace type players that, you know, might be able to try out at a few different positions. He's definitely got the athleticism for that.
He just jumped on my radar because he was the one throwing during the wide receiver drills.
Well, switching over to the defensive side of the ball, I just want you to tell me one thing, Rob, and that's that we are drafting Shaquem Griffin, and he's going to be a Seahawk. That's all I want to hear. I'm in love with Shaquem.
Yeah, I think that pretty much everybody who follows the NFL is today, and has been for a while. I mean, it's just an amazing story. I think the great thing about Shaquem Griffin is if you're having a lousy day, if it's raining outside, all you need to do is listen to the guy speak, and you just automatically feel like you're in a better mood. I mean, he's just got this amazing personality and positivity about him that I just think he's an incredible person. And that will matter to teams. You know, teams are going to look at him and think, wow, what an inspiring guy. You know, you're talking about the grittiest player in the draft, and it's not even close. You know, he is a number 1 overall pick in terms of grit. He then goes and runs a 4.38 at 227 pounds. And a lot of the comparisons are being made on the NFL Network to the fact that his twin brother ran a 4.38. Mm-hmm. He ran a 4.38 and he weighs 30 pounds more than Shaquille Griffin. I mean, he's a heavier guy and ran exactly the same 40-yard dash time. That is his incredible potential. I think that you do also have to, and I hate, look, there's every chance he will end up with the Seahawks. If you want me to say that he's going to be drafted by the Seahawks, he's going to be drafted by the Seahawks. There's a chance that he'll be drafted by the Seahawks. But we also have to be realistic and offer some perspective about what he is going to be at the NFL level. When he was playing for UCF, he did struggle at occasions to set the edge against the run. And if you're going to play him at linebacker full time, that is going to be a bit of an issue. And look, that's just the way it's going to be for him, unfortunately. It's very difficult to do it with one hand, to set the edge against the run. He's going to find some trouble there. But you can be creative with a player like that. He might not be a full-time, every down linebacker, but with 4.38 speed and the size that he's got, in certain down and distances, just having him running to the ball and playing in space and covering, he's going to be able to do a job for you there. You might be able to play him at safety or as a big nickel, for example. He's going to be the kind of player who will have impact plays as a blitzer, and you can put him in certain situations to be a very productive blitzer. He certainly was in college. He maybe tried at safety, and he's going to be a very dynamic special teams player as well. And for me, that type of player warrants 3rd, 4th round pick of anybody's draft. And I think that's the kind of range that he needs to be talked about now. He's a very special individual, a very special athlete, and he won't be a full-time every down starter, but he will have an impact on a football team.
Well, with Seattle not having a 3rd round pick, they either need to get one so they can get him, or maybe there's some other linebackers that we have to look at. And I know Darius Leonard was one of those guys on your radar, linebacker out of South Carolina State. Lorenzo Carter of Georgia, Kamoko Toure out of Rutgers. What did you think of those guys and how they performed?
I thought it was a pretty underwhelming day for the defensive linemen and the linebackers. They're just, I don't know if we've been spoiled for the last few years.
After we saw Shaquem Griffin do what he did, of course we're going to be disappointed by everything else. He's such the highlight today because everything else was pretty underwhelming.
We've seen in previous years, we've seen so many really explosive, dynamic linebackers and defensive linemen coming into the draft. Very agile linebackers last year. The guys like Tyus Bowser and TJ Watt were so athletic, and so the 3 cones and short shuttle times were incredible. People like not just Myles Garrett at the top of the draft, but all the way down, incredibly explosive defensive linemen. And what we've seen this year is a reduction in the number of explosive linemen. None of the 3 cone or the short shuttle times are particularly outstanding. Sam Hubbard, who's the defensive lineman from Ohio State, his 3 cone time was the 6th best by a defensive lineman in the last 10 years. That's really the only headline from the agility tests. So I thought it was a pretty underwhelming workout apart from Shaquem Griffin. Lorenzo Carter's probably the exception to that. He had a very, very good 40-yard dash time. When he was at the Spark Combine in, I think it was 2014 that he tested for that, he had a 40-inch vertical and did very well in the short shuttle. So you knew that he was quick and explosive, but he only had like a 4.64 40-yard dash. You wanted to see him improve on that, and he ran a 4.50 at the Combine today. So that box ticked. If people are looking for a really strong candidate to be a Leo for the Seahawks, or a Sam Leo linebacker to play that Bruce Irvin role, Lorenzo Carter is that guy. And if they manage to get another high pick, late 1st round, 2nd round, he could be an option for the Seahawks. But apart from that, there wasn't that much to get excited about. People like Tremaine Edmonds and Roquan Smith did okay. They're not going to be people that you would expect the Seahawks to take in the 1st round. Edmonds is going to be long gone anyway. Leighton Vander Esch had a really good workout, I thought. He's probably going to go a bit earlier than people think. I think he's going to go in the top 20. There were 1 or 2 others that kind of stood out among the linebackers. Dorian O'Daniel did quite well, made some plays for Clemson. He's a little bit undersized, didn't run a great 40, but had a really good short shuttle. Matthew Thomas has got some character flags from Florida State. Ran a 4.57 though, 41.5-inch vertical, 10.11 broad, good size. Could be somebody that they bring in and they work with, maybe as an undrafted free agent, maybe as a later round pick, could be a linebacker that they look at there. Jeff Holland didn't embarrass himself today as a pass rusher. Malik Jefferson, Micah Kaiser did pretty well as well. So there are players that you sort of look at and you think from round 3 to 7, I could give you a list of about 5 or 6 players that would be really good for the Seahawks that could be really interesting to them. But what there isn't in this draft are players that you feel like at number 18 or after a trade down that they really, really have to have. This is all the defensive line and the linebacker drills did was confirm, I think today, that the first few picks of the Seahawks, they have to focus on O-line and running back.
Well, what about interior defensive line? Because Vita Vea, one of the names that you mentioned, is a guy who pulled his hamstring doing the 40. I know University of Washington homers like Jason Bonner, they want to know if Vea could potentially fall to 18. And if he does, should the Seahawks take him there?
If I was Vita Vea, I would suggest to him right now to start looking at real estate in Tampa Bay, because I think he's going to go. I think it's pretty clear that he's going to go to the Buccaneers at number 7, unless they trade out of that pick. They really badly need some help on the defensive line, and if you could put him next to Gerald McCoy, then that is going to be a really fearsome front four for Tampa Bay next year. And I think he's going to go at number 7 to Tampa Bay. I think that would be a really realistic thing for him. Obviously, hurt his hamstring today and didn't do a lot of the testing, so we were kind of robbed of an opportunity to see him running in space, which is just incredible. When I went to watch the 2 Huskies games the last 2 years and being able to sit pretty much on the back row of one of the big stands, it just stood out so much how well he moved in space for a guy his size. So it would have been great to see him doing some other mobility drills, but it wasn't to be. I still think he's going to go in the top 10. In terms of interior defensive linemen, the short shuttle is an important test for these guys. Short area quickness and the 10-yard split is important for these guys as well. So some of the names that stood out today: Rasheem Green at USC is probably going to go in the first round. He's kind of an inside-out rusher. Decent size, about 275, 280 is what he'll play at. Ran a 4.39. That was the quickest short shuttle amongst the bigger guys. Taven Bryan had a fantastic workout. He's going to go in the first round for sure. Florida defensive lineman has got a bit of that J.J. Watt physicality about him and an explosion as well. Really good performance from him today. Virginia's Andrew Brown had a good short shuttle, 4.48. Decent for him. Harrison Phillips, explosive and quick, had a decent performance today from Stanford. You've got the Justin Jones and BJ Hill duo from NC State. A couple of names to keep an eye on. Nathan Shepard, who's the smaller school prospect, who really has jumped forward from the Senior Bowl and now at the Combine. He was superb during drills. The only problem is, and people will kind of cringe about this, but you have to pay attention to this stuff. The Seahawks have never drafted a defensive lineman with shorter arms than 33 inches, and Nathan Shepard's got like 32-inch arms. So I personally hope they're not going to rule him out because of that, but history would suggest that they've always gone for a certain type of defensive lineman, and he has got shorter arms than they've taken in the past. So I hope that's not the case, but he was really strong today. And then looking at the 10-yard splits, the likes of Daron Payne ran very quickly. Jalen Holmes could be an option on the 3rd day for the Seahawks, something that they could bring in for the defensive line. Has got some potential there. Kentavious Street is one of the few players who hurt his hamstring running the 40-yard dash, but a really good split there. Could be a 3 technique for the Seahawks. Breland Speaks had a nice split as well, the Mississippi guy, 1.67. Decent time for him. So, and Tyquan Lewis didn't run the 40. He didn't do any of the drills because he's got flu, but he did do the vertical jump and he did do the broad jump and really excelled in the explosive testing as well. So Tyquan Lewis, teammate of Jalen Holmes and Sam Hubbard, could be a guy that the Seahawks look for as well on day 3.
Well, another spot where numbers are particularly important is at defensive back. And this might be a quick conversation because they do their on-the-field drills on Monday, but we do have measurements in. And that's historically been important. 32-inch arms, every corner that the Seahawks have drafted. But you have to say, too, that it's not a deal breaker for being on the team. For example, Justin Coleman was a guy who played well in the slot. He has 31.25-inch arms. So what are some of the guys on your radar after the measurements came in?
Well, perhaps the freakiest player that's going to be there who fits the Seattle prototype is Isaiah Oliver, who is from Colorado, 33.5-inch arms, enormous wingspan of well over 80 inches. He's the type of player that the Seahawks have drafted under Pete Carroll. Some people predict that he's going to go in the first round. I think it's more likely he's going to go in the 3rd or 4th round, which is kind of the range where they took Shaq Griffin a year ago. So if they wanted to take a cornerback and if they were picking in that range, if they trade down and get into that range, if they address some other needs in free agency, then maybe they could consider him there. But I think it's more likely they're going to wait on this. Carlton Davis is a player that fits the bill and almost plays a little bit like Richard Sherman, but he's probably going to go in the top 40, you would say, and that's maybe a little bit rich for the Seahawks. Holton Hill is a player to watch from Texas, 32-inch arms, like the way that he plays. You can imagine the Seahawks taking a chance on him. His best football is going to come in the NFL. Kevin Tolliver from LSU is a player there to keep an eye on as well. He's had some issues in the past. Kevin Tolliver, he's a bit of an ego-driven type of guy, but they've taken problematic defensive backs from LSU in the past. So they might take a chance on the 5-star ability of Kevin Tolliver. He speaks well in interviews, so it's not that he's this really awkward character or anything. He's maybe just a bit full of himself, but then so is Richard Sherman. So that might be somebody that they look at as well. Yeah, he might be the perfect pick for them, sort of that 3rd, 4th round kind of range. Isaac Yiadom is a player to keep an eye on. I think that he could be an option for them. Chris Jones and Brandon Fakison, I think is how you pronounce it, from Virginia Virginia Tech, is a player that a couple of years ago looked the part of a first-round talent. Then he got injured. Then he came back and never quite looked the same. Maybe he just needs a bit of time to fully recover and get back up to his potential. But he's the kind of player that you could get a first or second round talent in the round 5-6 kind of range. And, we've known the Seahawks to look for those types of players at cornerback in the past as well. So he might be somebody that they think is worth taking a chance on later on. But it's going to be interesting to see how they test as well, because that's also important. Yeah,
I'm going to highlight that dude from Virginia Tech. That sounds pretty intriguing. One other guy I want to talk about on the back end, Justin Reed. Without seeing him drill, where do you think he might go? Is he a potential mid-round player at safety? I've heard some interviews with him. I think he interviews really well. An interesting player to me.
I don't trust anybody that spells Reed wrong on their last name. That's just not how you do it.
He doesn't have anything to do with that.
That's his fault.
Well, I have to say that I think he's going to go pretty early.
Yeah.
He's obviously got the bloodlines. He's Eric Reed's brother, who went number 18 overall. He is an incredibly explosive player. Before he went to Stanford, I think he jumped a 40-inch vertical, so you would expect him to do something like that again. On Monday, I think he's going to run a lot faster than he did before he moved to college. I think you could see a really quick time. And I think that people are a little prediction that maybe people will be talking about him a lot more after the combine. I think he's somebody who could potentially work his way into the top 50. And depending on how desperate you are for a safe job, depending on how desperate the teams are in the back end of round one, he could even sneak into that range. There are two guys. There are Reed and there is Jesse Bates III, who could really, really bolster their stock this weekend and leave the combine as players who people initially projected to go into the second or third round, or even the fourth round, but are going to end up being talked about as top 50 type players if they perform as expected at the combine.
One of the most fun stories that came out of the combine this weekend, Rob, was that the Seahawks had a staring contest with the punter from Texas. I don't know how that factors into any of the drills that he might be involved in, but I guess they found that was important.
Yeah, you gotta see if he's always going to compete.
Yeah,
there's probably something in that. You just I know it sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it makes for a great tweet, doesn't it? I saw a lot of people tweeting about that. If you need like a couple of hundred likes on something, a classic bizarre combine question makes for a great tweet. But it is a way of competing, I guess. Can you beat Pete Carroll in a staring competition? You've really found out about the character of a guy there. I read somewhere that people suggested maybe it's because it's so windy and cold in Seattle that maybe good eye control and not being able to blink a lot and keep your eyes open in the wind and the rain might be useful for a punter. So there might be something in that as well.
That's digging pretty deep. I figured it was just to break the ice.
Yeah, probably was.
No, I want eye control out of my punter. I think this is important.
Strong eye control. Yeah. Well, a couple of the positions that need strong eye control too, wide receiver and tight end, your pass catchers, the two spots we haven't talked about yet. Let's close off by talking about them. One thing that John Schneider said in his press conference is about how difficult it is to find receivers who are good at running routes, and which is one of the reasons why they liked Amara Darboh last year. Really, at the combine, though, you're looking at how the players catch the ball and their speed. And one of the things that you've talked about in your blog is Seattle tends to draft guys with speed, 4.4 type speed. But maybe this is a year that they look for maybe a bigger target, especially depending on what happens with Paul Richardson.
I think it definitely has to be the case, especially if they lose Jimmy Graham. They're going to need some size. They don't want to lose everything that they had in the red zone with the passing game this year, presuming that Graham moves on. So they're going to have to draft somebody with size, and you would imagine that will be a receiver. And there are one or two guys in this class, they're not fast guys, and they're probably going to last a bit later on, which will suit the Seahawks. People like Auden Tate from Florida State, for example, big frame, can box out a defender and make difficult catches. He's very similar to Mike Williams, essentially, and how he was in 2010, 2011. So, you would think that they might look at somebody like that. But they do have a type, and they do appreciate the good route running. And I think this is the best way to highlight the problem, is that one of the players that I really like in this class is a guy called Javon Wims from Georgia. And if you watched Georgia for, it was like a Georgia game every week here in the UK, because they were doing so well in the SEC, and we get all of the CBS SEC games over here. So they were on TV an awful lot, and he was a player who had done nothing for years at Georgia, and then in his senior year suddenly became their most dynamic receiving weapon in the passing offense. And a very vital target as well, because there was a true freshman quarterback throwing in the ball. But one thing you don't really realize until you think about it is an awful lot of his production came on two types of throw. The back shoulder throw to the sideline, which was where he made a lot of his catches that year, and in the red zone. And when you're actually evaluating Javon Wims, well, you could say, look, he had a great year. He was a vital part of Georgia almost winning the national championship. But in terms of the routes that he was running, there was not a lot there. You know, he was basically a back shoulder specialist and red zone specialist. And when he comes into the pros, he's going to have to learn a route tree. And I really liked Javon Wims, and I thought he tested quite well. But he's not a developed receiver, and he's the type of player that's probably going to need a year as a red shirt, the same way that even Darbo did, and Moore and others in the past, and Golden Tate have had to. He's probably going to need a year in order to get up to speed with an NFL offense. And I think that's kind of the thing that John Schneider is talking about. A lot of these receivers in college football are either run as fast as you can downfield and we'll throw you the ball and you'll just run away from everybody because you're that fast and you're going to be an NFL player. Or they are back shoulder throws, or they are bigger receivers who just high point or box out the defenders. There's not actually a lot of route development there. And it is hard to find the guys that do run quite established and good routes. And that's why I think they're looking at teams like Michigan with Lamar Jackson, for example, because Jim Harbaugh's there. They're going to want people who have coached pro offenses and are bringing that style to college in order to get the receivers that know how to run a route. And that's going to be a problem for Seattle. There are some names, though, to keep an eye on. I thought that DJ Chark had a great Senior Bowl. His tape's very inconsistent. He had a fantastic combine, 4.3 40, 6'3", 200 pounds, quite positive personality. You can imagine him fitting with the Seahawks. He's got some height, he's got some speed there, but he is inconsistent. His Alabama game, for example, was incredibly frustrating, and yet you see him in the Senior Bowl game and he was unstoppable. So someone who's maybe needs to round off some of the rough edges but has got some potential there could go in the second or third round. DJ Moore had a fantastic combine, very competitive, a bit like Golden Tate, a bit like Steve Smith, 6'0", 220 pounds, bigger than expected, but ran a 4.42, nearly a 40-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump. You watch him play, made plays all year for Maryland. Very, very competitive despite not being the tallest, can run downfield, wins in the short game, yards after catch specialist as well. And he was another player that really stood out from the combine.
Well, assuming Jimmy Graham moves on at tight end, who are some of the guys that we can look at there? To me, it doesn't seem like there's any of the pass catching tight ends that stand out.
But again, we don't really
those. Right.
We need a blocking one.
We need a blocking tight end.
Yes.
And you've got guys, Dalton Schultz. I really like that dude's last name. Durham Smythe and Will Dissly, another Washington guy.
Yeah, they're the blocking tight ends, and there's Ryan Izzo as well from Florida State, but I think he's more of a H-back type and maybe even more of a fullback than a tight end that you really want to establish in the passing game at all. And they still have to do a little bit in the passing game, but Dalton Schultz, Durham Smythe, they're the two guys that you know that they play for teams Stanford and Notre Dame who run the football, ask their tight ends to block. It was their main responsibility to block during college. You just watch any of their games from 2017, nearly everything they do is to block. I think that Schultz is fantastic in the running game blocking. Bryce Love had a number of big runs where, you know, the tackle does just enough to hold this guy off the edge, but it's actually the tight end that opens the crease and opens the hole for Bryce Love to break off the big runs. And Bryce Love didn't need much of an invitation to do that last year. So I think that Schultz is a really good player to keep an eye on, has got similar measurables to Zach Miller. So that's something to keep an eye on there. Durham Smythe, maybe not quite as athletic as Schultz is, but did really well at the Senior Bowl. Another player who loves to block. You see, he's got a real appreciation for knowing that was what his job was at Notre Dame. There was no complaining because he wasn't like Tyler Eifert or one of the other guys, or even a John Carlson at Notre Dame. They weren't asking him to do a lot in the passing game. His job was there to block, and he did it well. So there's two guys. Dissly, people who follow Washington will know all about him. He looks about 35 years old, even though he's at the combine. But you know, maybe that's a good thing. And he's got a real good mentality. I only watched him recently to blocking, and I don't think he's quite as high up in terms of potential and upside as the other two, as Schultz and Smythe. But if you were looking for someone on day three, he's going to be there. And I agree. I think it does have to be a blocking tight end. I had this conversation with somebody yesterday that it kind of makes me shudder with fear a little bit that Mike Gesicki did as well as he did for Penn State at the Combine. So if people missed it, he's very, very tall, very big. He ran a 4.5, 4.40, which was incredible. He had a 41.5-inch vertical and a 10.9 broad jump. It was one of the best tight end workouts we've seen in a generation. And when you watch him for Penn State, the guy does not block. He is the prototype, big slot receiver type tight end who just runs routes and is basically a receiver. We've seen 3 years of the Seahawks trying to turn Jimmy Graham into something that he isn't, which is the complete tight end. Mm-hmm. And I really, as much as I appreciate how Gesicki performed at the Combine, I don't want to see Pete Carroll and the Seahawks trying to turn him into a complete tight end. And a team like the Saints will draft him and they will throw the ball to Gesicki and he'll be what Jimmy Graham was in the past. And he will have loads of touchdowns and he'll have loads of production. That's what he will be. For the Seahawks, he'll be a liability because they'll put him on the edge and they'll expect him to block and he won't be able to do it. So I'm as much as I appreciate what Gesicki did, give me a Dalton Schultz, give me a Durham Smythe, give me a Will Disley, and let's just accept that the tight end is going to be what it is for the Seahawks, which is someone who blocks, who helps the running game and can move the chains every now and again, which is what Zach Miller did.
Where does a guy like Dallas Goedert fall into that? Because he's talked about as a pass catcher. He caught a lot of passes at South Dakota State, but he's also a guy who's seen as a guy who can block, maybe not against the top tier talent, being in the conference that he's in, but maybe a guy that can do both.
I've seen it suggested that he's the only one of the tight ends who might be considered as a first-round pick. But I have to say, I've not really seen any evidence of that. I think he's a little bit overrated. I do wonder if actually this does happen sometimes, that the fact that he's with a small school means he's getting more focus and attention than he otherwise would have got. And for me, he's a mid-rounder. He's very much with the Hayden Hurst types in the middle of the rounds. I think probably in the same kind of range that Dalton Schultz is going to go, which is probably round 3, round 4. Durham Smythe round 4. I kind of see him in that range. He didn't do anything at the Combine, so we don't really know what he is as an athletic profile. If he'd turn up and perform like Gesicki, then all bets are off. And who knows where Gesicki's going to go? You could see him going in the first round. You could see him going in the third round. I mean, and if Goedert had performed well, you could have said the same about him. But I came into the Combine thinking there wouldn't be a tight end drafted in the first 2 rounds. I now think because Gesicki has performed the way that he did at the Combine, somebody might take him in the top 50. But that's not a guarantee. And I think for the rest, I still think you're looking at best late second round, third round before you see a little bit of a mini rush on tight ends. But it's not a particularly great tight end draft this year.
Well, you have me convinced. Do not draft Gesicki for the Seahawks. That's not good. We have something to maybe root for in that regard.
I think he'd be. I will say, I think that given the way that he tested and having seen a lot of Penn State, he could be a good player. I just don't know whether he's going to be a good player for the Seahawks.
Yeah, you want it to be a scheme fit for what we've seen from the Seahawks. And with Jimmy Graham potentially moving on, I've talked about how I don't want to see him move on, but it makes sense based off of the scheme that the Seahawks have been going for, and just makes sense. So, Rob, I just want to say I appreciate you spending so much time with us this week. People need to go to the website, SeahawksDraftBlog.com, to get even more in-depth analysis on what happened through the Combine. Of course, we'll be looking for your results after the defensive backs go on Monday as well. And check you out on Twitter at Rob Staton. Rob, thanks again for coming on.
Anytime, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Well, a big thanks once again to Rob Staton for coming on the show. That'll give us a lot to go into through these next couple of weeks. I want to go and check out some of these prospects now.
Yeah, man, I'm definitely going to go look at the tape. And like I always say, when I say the tape, I mean YouTube stuff.
Yeah, YouTube.
So I'm gonna look at the tape because that makes me sound official, and come up with some very misguided thoughts and suggestions for John Schneider. That's my goal.
Well, it did have me going back to the tape on Orlando Brown for the Sooners, because I've always thought that
you're obsessed with this story.
Well, man. He's always just been a big dude to me. Like just watching Sooners games, he's never jumped out to me as like an elite type NFL player. I just thought he was a big dude.
Yeah, I read an article about him before this college season started. I mean, this is exactly who he is.
Yeah.
So I don't know why everybody's so freaking surprised.
Well, I was surprised that he was being talked about as a first round dude. And so that's it's interesting to me now that this is what it's going to take for people to maybe think about him a little bit differently.
No, that's a guy I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
I don't feel like he's a super motivated individual. I don't feel like he's a very athletic individual. And you put all that together, and that spells bust.
Well, Justin Sr. was a guy that they picked up last year. And again, not great numbers in terms of athleticism. But
his tape looked okay.
Yeah.
Offensive line's hard to judge.
It is. That's why we have experts to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right. Well, moving on. Hey, before we get into do better and better at life, Adam, Seattle looking like they're going to be getting a hockey team.
Hooray! I want to spend 5 seconds on that.
You're not in that.
If it's not an NBA team, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, see, this could motivate them with it. They had like 32,000 season ticket sales in like a day. Now an NBA team might happen.
The NBA is known forever that if they are going to expand, that Seattle's the first market. Yeah. So, like, let me know when they're ready to do it. But as far as a hockey team, hooray! I just don't care.
I'm a hockey fan.
I mean, it's almost. I care about that every bit as much as I care about the Mariners.
Oh, wow! Throwing down.
I just don't care for hockey and baseball or soccer.
You're
those
just
three
a basketball and football guy.
They bore the catfish out of me.
Well, when they get a basketball team, then you can finally get off your Boston bandwagon.
No.
You think you'll be a Celtics fan for a while anyway?
Yeah, dude, I'm not a bandwagon guy.
Whatever. You got off the Bills bandwagon.
One time in my life, and I was 18 years old. Good God.
I'm going to hang it over you. See?
Yeah, half the listeners on the show were
they weren't even born yet.
Exactly. They weren't even conceived.
Hey, you know what's fun? Getting new members of the flock.
Yes, it is.
$1 pledge from Jack Rayner. Jack, welcome to the flock.
Awesome. Welcome, Jack. Thank you very much.
He says, new to the flock in your podcast, but I love it. I'm from Cambridge, England, and will be at the Seahawks game in London to see them for the first time. Thank you for the podcast. And of course, go Hawks.
Go Hawks, man. We will see you there.
Yes. Got my plane ticket this last week.
Yep.
Doing it.
Oh, yeah. We're doing this.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And we got a raise this week from RJ Pewterbaugh, $1 up to $6. So we will see him in the Ring of Honor.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much, RJ. He'll be a great addition to the Ring of Honor. No doubt about it.
Looking forward to it. All right. Let's get into some do better and better at life.
All right, man. Who you got?
My do better this week is for Delta Airlines. Man, this was one of the most disappointing stories to come out of the Olympics, Adam.
Okay.
Because U.S. curling team.
Yeah.
They get the gold medal. Did
they win gold?
They won gold at the Winter Olympics.
Congratulations, John Schuster. Wow.
Yeah.
Good job, dude.
And so they tweet out to Delta and they say, hey, how about hooking up some Olympic curling champions with some upgrades for our flight back home?
Yeah.
Delta's response, hey there. Congratulations, gold medal champions. We are honored to be your ride back home. While we don't have any upgrades to offer, we look forward to seeing you on board. Thanks for flying with us.
Wow. Curling has no pull.
No pull at all from Delta Airlines.
Wow. Delta Airlines has been kind of stingy with the discounts and upgrades lately here over the last couple of weeks.
I can understand if it's a silver or a bronze and they're curlers.
Right.
But we're talking about gold medal curlers. They beat the Canadians. I don't know who they beat in the finals. What was it?
I don't know. Hard telling not knowing. Yeah. I watched one frame of curling, and that's it. That's all I watched in the Olympics.
But you could at the very least, for anybody who gets on board with a gold medal,
hell yes,
you move them up front. And maybe you don't have spots in first class, but you got to at least give them like the extra leg room toward the front.
Comfort Plus. Yeah. There's got to be at least a Comfort Plus seat.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe comp their beer.
Right. So when you tweet back at them, don't just say, sorry, no upgrades for you. No, you come back with Comfort Plus. You come back with free beer. The curlers,
extra bag of pretzels, something, man.
Free beer and pretzels. You got to put that in the tweet back to them, because then at least when this makes news and the rest of the country sees it, you're at least speaking to the curlers. Like, free beer, free pretzels. That's what they get. And you're going to make some points. But as it is, this isn't working for me. Do better.
Man, Delta needs to get with their PR folks, because they're not on it right now.
No.
They're not on it right now at all. My do better this week is for Purdue University professor Jay Malosh. And Jay, this guy, I look, there are certain things that you just don't crap on, okay? There's just certain things you don't crap on because it's cool. And just stop it with your doomsday stuff. I'm bringing us back to Elon Musk and him shooting his Tesla into space because this is
like 3 weeks in a row, dude.
I don't care. We're going back. So Jay Malosh of Purdue University is all bent out of shape because he's concerned that in a million years that Elon Musk's Tesla may possibly hit Mars and then might possibly contaminate the planet of Mars with bacteria from the Earth because it wasn't a sterile thing like one of the rovers that we sent up, which there could be bacteria on any one of those too. I don't care how sterile you're trying to be, like crap happens. And the thing is like, you know, there's a possibility, but I mean, we're talking about some of this is so far in the future, A, and B, the possibility is so stinking remote. It's ridiculous to like start having a hissy fit about this, but this is what he says. He says, if there's an indigenous Mars biota, it's at risk of being contaminated by terrestrial life. Would Earth's organisms be better adapted, take over Mars and contaminate it so we don't know what indigenous Mars was like? Or would they be not as well adapted as the Martian organisms? We don't know. Dude, it's pretty likely there's no life on Mars right now. Like, we've been roving around it for a while now. Haven't come across it. Don't crap on something cool. A billionaire shot his car into space. Quit being a Debbie Downer. Do better.
This sounds exactly why you don't like Damashek's NFL. There's too many ifs in this.
Dude, okay, so let's say, here's the thing. In a million years, the human race probably won't even be around anyways. But let's say we are. Right. By that time, I'm sure we have people on Mars in a million years.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's happening. It'll already be contaminated.
Well, considering what Matt Damon did there in The Martian, it's got to be contaminated.
Well, yeah, he threw his pool around.
I don't know, grew potatoes with it.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to Better at Life this week, we have a little special Better at Life. This one comes in from Mark in Carroll, Western Australia.
Okay.
Says in an email here, I'm glad this is in the off season, so I feel it can be a little informal and personal.
Are we ever formal on this show?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, you're always good being an informal person with us, man.
Right. Well, Mark says, my Better at Life this week, and I'm going to carry this on for him. Better at Life this weekend is for Mark's girlfriend, Beck.
Oh, okay.
He said they've been together for coming up on 2 years. 3 weeks ago, she up and moves from Melbourne to Curup, which is what he says is comparable from moving from New York to Seattle or Toronto to Vancouver.
Oh, so all the way across the continent.
Yeah, or the same distance as the Tour de France race.
Yeah.
She started a new job and a new life and handled it like a champ. How does this all relate to us 12s? Apart from me slowly bringing her around to the way of the hawk, the Seahawkers podcast is the only podcast out of the many sports pods I listen to that she will listen to when we are both in the car.
Amazing.
So for being the best human to me, a budding new member of the 12s, for being brave, level-headed, and for having great taste in podcasts, even if I have to squeeze them in between cycles of Taylor Swift albums. Beck, you are better at life than Skip Bayless.
So he's making sacrifices too. I mean, they're listening to some T Swift in there.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a sacrifice that is, really.
Look, all I got to say, man, is put a ring on it.
Yeah.
Just do it. Like, yeah.
You got it.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah. She sounds like a pretty rad chick.
That's why she gets better at life this week.
I
don't even know if it's from moving from New York to Seattle, because I've never heard of Curup before. Is it like moving from New York to, I don't know, Camas, Washington?
Like Kalispell? Yeah. Hard telling, not knowing. I don't know. I don't know all the sizes of Australian towns.
I didn't even know there were even towns on the west side of Australia.
I didn't know there was more than one town
until Mark started listening.
Yeah.
He might be the only dude over there.
All right, man. My Better at Life this week is for another awesome chick, Dolly Parton.
All right.
That's right. Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton started a foundation back in the 90s, 1995. And it is called the Imagination Library. And this last week, they celebrated the Imagination Library, their 100th millionth book donated to the Library of Congress.
Wow.
Which is pretty outstanding. And the idea here is that she's been trying to send out free children's books to any kids that need them since 1995 and has managed to do that 100 million times. That's pretty amazing. Do you think of Dolly Parton as like a literary scholar or something? Like, is that the person that you would think would be, donating books to people? That wouldn't be the first thing I thought of her.
Well, I just think Hall of Fame country singer is all that comes to mind.
Yeah. So anyways, I guess part of that 100 millions of books that has been donated, they've gone all over the world to like Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, all that stuff. So just for doing that, I think that's pretty stinking cool. Trying to raise literacy among kids and get them interested in books. So Dolly Parton, better at life than Skip Bayless.
Absolutely. To a guy who doesn't read, to someone who's given out 100 million books.
So why would I read? Our president doesn't read.
Skip Bayless is a person who doesn't read.
I thought you were saying I didn't read.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if you read books, but you do read.
I do read books every so often. But here's the thing. This is the reason why I don't read a lot of books, is because when I get one that I like, I got to finish the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like I can't just read a chapter and come back to it 2 days later. That's like a 2-day time commitment.
I have one book that I started reading and never finished. And to this day, I know what book that is.
Yeah.
It was The Chamber by John Grisham. Couldn't finish it.
Well, there it is. So, but yeah, I read a lot otherwise. That's how I could bring you things like Dolly Parton.
Yeah. Outstanding. Well, Adam, it is the first of the month, and we shout out to all our monthly contributors of $12 or more. It's kind of like rolling the credits at the end of the movie. So a big thanks to DCH in Sparks, Nevada, Ron in San Francisco, Ross in Eureka, California, Ella in Woodway, Texas, Christina in Manassas, Virginia, Mark, who we brought up before, Mark in Kirrup, Western Australia, Jameson in Murray, Utah, Summer in Vancouver, Washington, David in Camas, Washington, James in Linwood, Hector in Seattle, Roe in Federal Way, Keegan in Colorado Springs, Sven in Teltow, Germany, Craig in Camas, Washington, Tim in Austin, Texas, Young in Anchorage, Gary in Chappaqua, New York, Becca in Manhattan Beach, California, Keith in Covington, Washington, a.k.a. Flocktimus Prime, John in New York City, Sam in Altadena, California, Garrett in Northern Ontario, Taylor in Edmonds, John Paul in Palmer, Alaska, Kathy in Eureka, California, and Elisa in New York City, Joshua in London, Kevin in Keene, Texas, Brandon in Huntersville, North Carolina, Crystal in Oldsmere, Florida, Paul in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Christian in Bergen, Norway, Dave in Hong Kong, Mike in Anchorage, Alaska, Pepper in Greenville, South Carolina, Lisa in Seattle, Craig in Pasco, Washington, Thomas in the Bronx, and Glenn in St. Cloud, Florida. A huge thanks to you, and a huge thanks to all of you who help support us at getintheflock.com. And with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks. And you're busting my balls.
Yeah, of course. We're buddies. That's what we do.
You can bust my balls whenever you want, Brandon.
Damn right I will.
But just make sure that your balls aren't exposed, because I'll bust yours too.
I know when it's coming.
All the balls busted.
Are you trying to say balls as many times as possible?
Yep. That's exactly what I'm doing. Tell me that's not fun.
Oh, it's fun. Hey, you know what's fun?
Balls.